A political conflict is emerging in Europe, one that reaches far beyond the borders of a single country. A conflict that reveals how dramatically the continent's political landscape is changing. At the center of it all is Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orbán, and a ruling by the European Court of Justice that is sending shockwaves across Europe. Orbán has accomplished something many believed impossible. Hungary won a case against the powerful European Commission. For Orbán, this is not just a legal victory but a symbolic moment meant to shake the foundations of Brussels. In his view, the ruling shows that even small states can push back against EU decisions when they believe their sovereignty is at stake. Orbán describes this moment as a red line, a point at which the Commission went too far. In Hungary and many other countries, the ruling is seen as a sign that Europe is changing and that power dynamics are being renegotiated. And for exactly this reason, Orbán is seizing the political moment to spark a broader debate about migration, national self-determination, and Europe itself. In his speech before the Hungarian parliament, Orbán paints a picture of a European Union that interferes too deeply in national decisions. Especially on migration, he accuses the Commission of trying to pressure Hungary into decisions that contradict the will of its population. For Orbán, this is not just politics. It's about identity, security, and the question of who has the final say, Brussels or national parliaments. The court's ruling, which strengthened Hungary's position, is seen by Orbán as proof that resistance is possible. And this message is spreading quickly across Europe. In Poland, Spain, Bulgaria, Slovakia, and many other countries, dissatisfaction is growing over decisions coming from Brussels that are often perceived as too far removed from the everyday lives of ordinary people. Orbán taps into this sentiment and formulates an appeal that feels like a wake-up call for many Europeans. If a country like Hungary can push back and be heard, why not others? He uses the opportunity to list a wide range of issues he believes originate in Brussels, from economic strain and rising energy prices to trade agreements that could disadvantage certain countries. Even the ecological transformation of the economy, the so-called green transition, is viewed critically in some places. Orbán weaves all of these topics into a larger narrative. Europe stands at a crossroads, and many people no longer feel represented by the EU's current decisions. Meanwhile, tensions in Brussels are rising. Within the European Parliament, more and more voices are calling for fundamental reforms of EU institutions. Some critical members accuse the Commission of reacting too slowly to the economic and social challenges faced by member states. Others fear that Orbán's national course could divide Europe. But regardless of where one stands, one thing is clear: the political tone on the continent has changed. Orbán presents an alternative he calls a Europe of sovereign nations, a vision in which countries retain greater control over migration, economic policy, and international partnerships. He emphasizes that cooperation is still possible, but without centralized directives that may conflict with national interests. As an example, he points to investments from China and new economic partnerships that Hungary has pursued independently of Brussels. His message: prosperity and international relations can flourish even without close alignment with EU leadership. In his narrative, Hungary becomes a model for countries seeking greater flexibility. The European Commission views this approach critically. Many politicians in Brussels warn that too much national unilateralism could endanger Europe's cohesion. For them, the EU's strength lies precisely in coordinated common policies. But for Orbán, it is this very centralization that increasingly conflicts with the interests of certain states. Strengthened by the court's ruling, Orbán is using the public spotlight to the fullest. He announces national consultations in which citizens can directly voice their opinions on issues such as taxes, migration, and energy policy. Thousands of proposals are said to have been submitted within just a few days, a sign of a politically mobilized population. Orbán cites figures intended to show that planned EU tax reforms could heavily burden certain professional groups: teachers, police officers, soldiers, doctors, farmers. He uses these data to argue that Brussels proposes reforms without consulting the public and that the consequences are unevenly distributed. For a YouTube audience, Orbán explains these developments with clear, emotional messages. The EU is drifting away from its citizens, decisions are becoming more opaque, and the working population bears the cost in the end. He raises the question of how democratic a system can be if central decisions are not directly approved by the people. Across several countries, rising energy prices, economic pressure, and uncertainty are fueling protest movements. Farmers in Spain, families in Eastern Europe, workers in France, all expressing frustration at political measures they see as overwhelming. Orbán ties these voices together into a larger narrative, a Europe at a turning point. He repeatedly emphasizes that this is not about destroying the EU, but about reorienting it. In his opinion, Europe must return to a system that primarily reflects the interests of citizens and nation-states. Cooperation, yes, but not at the price of independence. As the debate expands, one question moves to the forefront. What kind of Europe do we want to live in? A centralized Europe pursuing major collective goals, or a decentralized Europe in which individual nations retain significantly more decision-making power? Orbán argues that the project of a European superstate has reached its limits and that the future lies in a more flexible, multipolar structure. He presents this view as a necessary step to protect democracy and economic stability. By the end of his speech, one thing becomes clear. For Orbán, this is no longer just a political dispute. It is a struggle over identity, direction, and the future of Europe in the coming decades. His appeal is directed at both Hungary and neighboring states. Europe needs fundamental change to avoid further economic and social tension. Whether Orbán's vision will ultimately prevail remains uncertain, but he has undeniably achieved one thing. He has ignited a debate that Europe can no longer ignore. The court's ruling was merely the trigger, yet it has set a much larger process in motion, one that reaches far beyond Hungary itself. In the coming years, the political landscape of Europe will be shaped by the questions raised today. How far should EU institutions be allowed to go? How much autonomy should member states retain? And where lies the balance between unity and sovereignty? These are not just administrative questions. They strike at the heart of what Europe is and what it wants to become. Governments, citizens, and political movements across the continent are reevaluating the purpose of the European project. Should it move toward deeper integration to respond more effectively to global challenges, or should it decentralize to ensure individual nations maintain a stronger voice? The debate is already influencing elections, political strategies, and public opinion. With economic pressures rising and geopolitical tensions intensifying, Europeans are becoming increasingly aware that decisions made now will shape the continent for generations. Orbán's challenge to Brussels has thus become more than a national dispute. It is a test of the EU's long-term resilience and its ability to reform. Some warn that too much fragmentation could weaken Europe in an era that demands unity. Others argue that without meaningful reform, the EU risks drifting away from the very people it claims to represent. Between these poles lies a wide range of possible futures, each carrying its own hopes and dangers. One thing, however, is undeniable. Europe has entered a defining moment. Long-held assumptions are being questioned, new political alliances are emerging, and citizens increasingly demand transparency and influence over decisions that shape their daily lives. The EU, once centered on economic cooperation and the promise of peace, must now redefine its identity in a world that is changing faster than ever. Orbán's forceful intervention has pushed this transformation into the spotlight. Whether he is seen as a defender of national sovereignty or a disruptive force, his impact is clear. His message resonates with many who feel overlooked and provokes strong resistance among those who believe the EU remains essential for stability. Which path Europe will choose remains uncertain. But the era of avoiding difficult conversations is over. Europe must confront its contradictions, reassess its values, and decide what kind of union it wants to be. The question is no longer whether Europe will change, but how.